Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to this edition of, let's see, The Right Balance. Last time I checked, Greg Allen here. And welcome to hour number 2 of The Right Balance on the Accent Radio Network. Greg Allen here. It's our pleasure to introduce a gentleman who's had a tremendous impact, not only on Christian music, but secular entertainment as well, and a very, very long career. And heck, folks, he can't be all bad because he's from the state of Florida. In fact, was born in Jacksonville. Pat Boone, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm a Florida cracker.
I think your version of April Love and Love Letters in the Sand are two of the finest love ballads ever to become popular.
Well, that's music to my ears. I thank you, because, you know, what puzzles me, and I don't know if you have an answer, but usually, I mean, it's just to be expected. If a song becomes a big hit, in a few years, somebody else will do their version of that song. Nobody has ever done any of my music, not one. And it puzzles me because I had number 1 hits, top 2, top 3s, top 5s, I think about 20 or so top 10s, and not one of those songs has ever been recorded by anybody. It's like, I don't know if they consider I ruined it or somehow I just made it my own and nobody wants to even try.
Well, you want to hear my theory, and I'm very serious when
please.
I say it? I think there are certain singers that critics don't take seriously enough. I don't know why critics decide to just fall in love with one voice and not another. You're underrated as a singer for the same reason Bing Crosby was underrated as a singer. If you make it sound easy and smooth, sometimes you're not taken seriously. I think Bing Crosby was one of not only great pop singers of all time, but I think was genuinely an innovator. Yeah. And he had a wonderful less is more approach. Now, you are very comparable. When you look at the body of your work, especially the ballads, you're very similar, not in sound to Bing Crosby, but in understatement. I think that's part of it. You make it look easy,
I always
Pat.
tried to make it effortless, seemingly, and it's not always effortless, although it used to be easier than it is now. But I so agree with you about Bing. He and Frank Sinatra, the two of them. Oh, yeah. They can't ever have, I think, a parallel or anybody that approaches them for longevity, for diversity, for believability, for, you know, just numbers of chart records. I mean, Bing, I don't think anybody, well, Elvis, I guess, has. I'm not even sure Elvis has had as many chart records as Bing, though.
Well, hello to those listening on the radio, and hello to those listening on the Internet. We are The Right Balance, hour number 2. Right now, we're going to go a little bit, shall we say, in a different direction. When this book arrived, well, I open up this one little package, and there is this beautiful, beautiful lab on the cover named Marley. Absolutely gorgeous little pup. And then I read it's called Marley and Me, subtitled Life and Love with the World's Worst Dog. Let's speak with John Grogan. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Marley is beautiful, but I gather he's, shall we say, impish.
Well, Marley got all the luck, and he didn't do too well in the brain department. He was full of energy and hyperactivity and a lot of impish, mischievous behavior, and so, you know, and he also went from being that cute little puppy to being 100 pounds of pure energy. So we definitely had our hands full with Marley.
Yeah, they were wonderful breed labs, all of them. I think they're just a great breed of dog by and large. But you're right, every so often someone comes along with a bit of the Dennis the Menace in them. Before we continue our conversation on Marley, I note that you used to write in the state of Florida as someone who also did some writing for newspapers in the state of Florida. Who'd you write for?
I was a columnist for the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel. I was down there for 12 years, and now I'm at the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Well, okay, because I used to write for the South Florida Newspaper Network and did some freelance pieces with the Palm Beach Post, so we were in the same backyard in general.
Well, right, and my wife, who's in the book, Jenny, she was a reporter at the Palm Beach Post through a good chunk of the story that takes place in the book.
Well, as it relates to Marley and Me, how did you come across this? And I think we have an awful lot of people in our audience. We talk about, obviously, politics a lot, but I think Marley and Me is a good book if you want to get away from politics for a couple of hours. How did you get Marley?
Marley, you know, I think our story is a pretty typical story. Jenny and I were this young couple, newlywed, starting out in life. We had our first house down by the water in West Palm Beach, Florida. and we bring this little puppy into our home, and he quickly grows into this big barreling manic dog with all sorts of bad manners and a short attention span. And as we were trying to train him, what was really happening was he was really influencing us as we were forming our relationship and sort of trying to figure out what kind of a couple and family we were going to become. So he became part of our life just as we became part of his. And it was hard to distinguish after a while, that we were separate. He was part of the family. We recognized he's an animal, he's a pet, but still, he influenced us in ways that really changed the type of people we turned out to be.
The memories. I love that song. Absolutely do. The book is Louie Louie, Me Gotta Go Now, by Dick Peterson, who's been with that band, the Kingsmen, since 1963. Dick, welcome to the show.
Hey, what are you doing this morning?
First and foremost, Dick, as a longtime member of the band, the Kingsmen, Louie Louie was one of the most controversial songs ever.
Louie Louie is controversial because it wasn't meant to be a recording for a record. It was really meant to be an audition tape to get a job on a cruise ship. Well, being 17 years old and pooling $36 to get an hour in a recording studio that really wasn't a recording studio. I mean, Portland, Oregon's not the mecca of the recording industry, but they did have an industrial recording studio there. So the band went in and recorded Louie Louie for this audition tape. That was also the very first day, the very first performance that Louie Louie was performed as a vocal. Jack didn't really know the words. The lyrics are also, it's an old Jamaican song, so the lyrics have that backwards feel to it. It's supposed to be kind of reggae, so the vocal really is written for a reggae rhythm, but when you bash it away like the Kingsmen do, it sort of all comes out a big jumbled massive mess with all sorts of mistakes. But see, the band is always, and to this day, we still go out and perform, we've always had the same philosophy. If we start together and end together, and if everything is louder than everything else, it's got to be good.
Thank you, Nick Lowe, one of my all-time favorite Brit rockers. We do have good bumper music on this program, indeed. Right now we're talking about really, really good kids' books. The sequel, if you will, book number 2, Help, Mom, Hollywood's in My Hamper. And we're speaking with Catherine Debrecht. Catherine, let me ask you something that may be very obvious, but it's also very important. When someone has a hit record, that's the business I know best, is the music business. And I've known people in my life who have written hit records. Back in the day when I was a working musician, I knew the gentleman who wrote a couple of the hits for the Turtles, for example. She'd Rather Be With Me being one of them. One of the problems you have sometimes with a hit record is comparable to a hit book. What do I do next? So did you go through any pressure of what did I do to make it right the first time, or did you just simply say, the heck with it all, I'm going to write another book and not worry about it?
I think the latter. I had so much fun with the first book. People had written me, a lot of times saying, thank you, please write more, please write more. This is something that we've been looking to balance all the agenda that's thrown at our kids on a daily basis. So I said, the heck with it, I'm going to write it. And I really thought about Hollywood because I think a lot of parents can agree. When I'm watching what's on television or that's coming out of the movies and stuff, as a parent, I keep thinking to myself, how do I show? Because I can tell my kids something until I'm blue in the face, but how do I show them that they're getting damaging messages from these people, these celebrities that they idolize on the television and the screen? And so that was kind of my thing, okay, well, let's do this one on Hollywood because there's just so much material out there to work with.
And welcome to this hour of The Right Balance on the Accent Radio Network. Greg Allen here. Right now, I would say, not only one of the best writers, but certainly one of the most successful as well, because not every great writer is successful. And let's talk about the new novel right now, The Gods of Newport, with John Jakes. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
You write a lot about things I like as it relates to the South, so on and so forth, and in all the places I've ever lived, and I've lived a lot of different places, Charleston, South Carolina, and St. Augustine, Florida being my favorites. But you have a new book out. It takes place in the Northeast, if you will,
right.
The Gods of Newport.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, I've got to ask you, since it's the first time you and I have ever had the opportunity to chat, I'm always curious as to how any writer, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, regiments his life. Are you a very regimented, on-schedule writer, or are you of the variety of when the light bulb goes off, I write, when it doesn't, I don't?
No, the former. I somehow, I was in advertising for 17 years, and lived by the watchword of the account executives, I don't want it good, I want it Tuesday. So I've been fairly disciplined all my life, and I think that's the only way you get a body of work. Now, you may get one or two books in your life through the other method of inspiration, but like many of my colleagues, I stick at it.
And I do note that you live between South Carolina and Florida, and we have very similar taste, I tell you. I love Charleston. I love the Battery. It's one of the most beautiful parts of the country.
Yes, indeed.
As it relates to your new book, The Gods of Newport, can you give us a thumbnail sketch, the overall theme, if you will?
Well, the novel deals with the heyday of Newport, Rhode Island, when it was known around the world as the Queen of Resorts, when European nobility flocked there to see and be seen. Perhaps the gentleman wished to marry a rich heiress. New York society ruled that summer colony, and those wonderful, huge mansions were built in the period from 1880 on up until the early 20th century, given the European name cottages.
There's an understatement.
I know. I asked about that immediately, and I was told by the Newport Historical Society to say, well, that's the European sense of the word. A cottage was a place you lived part-time. You didn't spend all your waking days in one spot.
So in other words, John Jakes, you had your cottage in Newport and your cottage in Palm Beach.
That's about right.
It's a nice way to cottage.
So I followed my usual pattern with the book of mixing fictional characters with some of the real-life people who dominated that scene back in the 1890s. And my fictional robber baron is a railroad man who wants to crash Newport society for the sake of his daughter, but unfortunately his money is a little too new for them.
And we are back. We're speaking with Dan Gurney, my all-time favorite race car driver. Dan, I can remember one race before we start talking about your alligator motorcycles. I saw you race at Watkins Glen in a Formula One race, and it started to rain, and you did a masterful job of driving in the rain. And I've always wanted to ask you, what is it about driving a race car in the rain from a driver's point of view that makes it so different from in the dry?
I think to predict what the limits are is extremely difficult. The vision thing is really difficult, at least it was in those days. You often had fogged up goggles or other kinds of leakage with water, and so vision was paramount, but also just the way a car is balanced. You're trying to run it on the limit, and the limit is ill-defined because the conditions are changing all the time, and you're trying to be there on the limit. Some cars will snap at you and just about try to take you out, and others will work with you and are kind of what they say nowadays user-friendly, and those are the most fun cars to drive in the rain.
And we are back, The Right Balance on the Accent Radio Network. Greg Allen here, and right now, this is an honor to say the least, to talk to someone who really is a pioneer of media and television and things related. And Ed McMahon, welcome to The Right Balance.
Good morning, Greg. How are you doing?
Well, as it relates to your new book, When Television Was Young, subtitled Live, Spontaneous, and in Living Black and White. Yes, I'm old enough to remember the Dumont Network. Ed, obviously with all your years with The Tonight Show, your associations with Johnny Carson, so on and so forth, I really think it's safe to say you are a pioneer in terms of this medium. And I'm curious, because I don't know the full tale, how did you wind up connected with Johnny in the first place?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I was in World War II. I was a Marine fighter pilot. When the war was over, I went to Catholic University. I knew television was coming. I'd been in radio before going to college, Boston College, for a year and a half. I'd been in radio. I knew television was coming. So I got on television in 1949. That's when you knew me from Atlantic City. I worked on the boardwalk selling gadgets, and I got a job. I left from $500 a week to $75 a week on television, but I had to be on it. And then soon after that, I moved right next door to Dick Clark. And Dick Clark and I were next door neighbors. And they did a person-to-person show with him. And after the show, the owner of the apartment complex said, "Come on down to the club. We'll have entertain these people from New York." So I went down, and the owner of the club said, "Get up, Ed, and do some stuff." So I got up, did a couple of jokes, sang a song, whatever. And Dick Clark's producer said, "Boy, you're terrific. I'm going to remember you." I said, "That's nice. Thank you." What he did was his office was right next to Johnny Carson's. He heard they were using an announcer they had to get rid of because he had got his own show. And in those days, they had these terrible rules. You couldn't work on one network if you worked on another, kind of stupid rules. But anyway, he overheard them talking. They got to get a new announcer. He said, "I got just a guy for you in Philadelphia. I'll have him here tomorrow morning." I came up, met Johnny Carson. It was kind of uneventful, but 3 weeks later, the producer called me and said, "Johnny would like you to wear suits." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Wear a suit." He wants to wear sports clothes. I said, What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, didn't they call you? You got the job. You start Monday."
Now, as it relates to your new book, The Afghan, we'll certainly be talking about that, but since it's our first conversation with each other, I'm always curious how a writer got his first book published, because there's usually one of two ways, or one of two basic stories. Either Frederick Forsyth went out to the world and was rejected everywhere and finally had it happen, if you will, or you had luck from jump. How did your story begin in terms of your first book?
Halfway between the two. I wrote the story with no publisher in mind and certainly no commission by anybody to write it. I just wrote it because I was a foreign correspondent. I was freelance. Back from Africa, pretty undernourished because there was no food down there, and tired and skint. I mean, absolutely, without a penny to my name. Pretty sickened by the slaughter I'd seen down there, and I just thought, what am I going to do? And so I thought, I'll write a novel and see if that'll get me through a bad patch. And everyone laughed at me and said, "Don't be silly, nobody. First novels never get published anyway, and even if they did, they'd only make you $20, and you do something else." I thought, oh, well, I'm so stupid and so naive, I'll do it anyway. So I did it, and it was called The Day of the Jackal. And I did indeed hawk it around from February through September of the year 1970, and I was rejected 4 times. And the 5th accepted it and went even further. A very smart guy said, "I like this enough to ask you to sign up a 3-novel contract, this plus 2. I said, "Okay, fine." They were offering me money which I'd never seen. So that became Jackal, Odessophile, and Dogs of War.
Mayor Koch, in the minute and a half that we have left with you, and thank you for coming aboard again, and have a good weekend.
You too.
As it relates to the Democratic Party, you're one of those people who will praise your party or condemn your party appropriately. And
on the merits.
Exactly right. What would you tell them right now, as they're a month away from taking power in Washington? What advice would you give them?
Well, the advice that I think is warranted is forget the radical ideas of the radical wing of the Democratic Party. If you want to remain in power and authority, remember that America is basically centrist. I happen to be a Democrat, and I'm left of center, but a moderate left of center. I believe that the Democratic Party can lose its way because, regrettably, the leaders, Pelosi and Dean and Kennedy, are not centrist. They are radical left.
Well, at this point, Mayor Koch, I have to say goodbye to you. We're simply out of time for the day and for the week. We are the right balance. It's a wee bit different. We're a one-on-one interview show. There's lots of shows out there for callers to call in and vent. We are, in a sense, listen radio. You're at the diner. The people next to you are actually having an interesting conversation, and you're tuning into their conversation. That's sort of what we're about. We try to be a brain buffet. We are conservatively oriented. And also, unlike most conservative shows, if you listen to our music, for example, we also have a big belief that pop culture matters as well. Right now, let's speak with Frank Salvato from the New Media Journal. Now, as it relates to your new article, Immigration Reform Begins in Mexico, it can be found at newmediajournal.us. Why don't you fill in the blanks? It's about what? He asked knowingly.
Well, our mainstream media is focusing on what our politicians are doing in Washington to affect the illegal immigration problem here in the United States. It's a one-sided story as far as they're reporting it. If the economy in Mexico were equitable, if there wasn't so much corruption in the Mexican government and the Mexican economy, Mexican people could make a living within the borders of their own country. And the United States gives an inordinate amount of aid to them. We just gave them a $20 billion life raft, as it were, to help bail out their economic problem with the peso not too long ago. And for just 3 programs, we give them $33 million a year, and that's a recurring payment. We should tie any kind of financial foreign aid to that country with them reforming their government, reforming their economic system, so that Mexican people will want to stay in their own country and because they can make a living rather than coming here and working for sub-minimum wage. It's a logical solution that we don't have to fix it just inside our country. Let's look at Mexico and say, why are they leaving?
Welcome back. We are The Right Balance on the Accent Radio Network, over the air and on the Internet. We are speaking with the godfather of British blues, John Mayall. It's a second visit to our show. John, you've got a brand new compact disc out, The Palace of the King. It's album number 56. It's dedicated to Freddie King, who died much too young. For the young listeners out there, and I know, John, this show, it's funny, a lot of people may disagree with my Barry Goldwater right-of-center politics, but I know I've got a lot of college kids out there and younger people who are into music and who trust my taste. You picked a good one when it comes to taking your talents and connecting it with Freddie King, because he really deserves to be mentioned in the same breath with Albert King and B.B. King.
Absolutely, yeah. I first heard Freddie King through getting an import LP from America. I think it was called Freddie King Sings the Blues, and it absolutely turned me around because not only was his guitar playing so dynamic, but it was his singing that really got to me. And, I was just a big fan ever since. His records weren't available in England at that time. It's probably about 1962, 63. And so I had to send off them through record collecting magazines. The single Hideaway and several others as they became available. And, he was just one of the pioneers, as far as I'm concerned, which went towards the sound of the early blues breakers. So, we always featured a great guitar player, and when Eric Clapton joined the Blues Breakers in 65, we did Hideaway as one of the showcases for Eric. I did some of Freddie's blues songs as well. So, he's always been connected with the Blues Breakers and their history, and, I've never lost an opportunity to promote him.
And we are back. Greenwich Mean Time is the name of the band in the background, playing that wonderful Celtic rock band out of Canada. Love that kind of music. We are speaking with Tom DeLay. We're talking about his new book, No Retreat, No Surrender. Tom, you really do have a fascinating background. It is not the typical political background. So in the 6 minutes or so we have left, let's talk a little bit about that. Can you paint the picture, please, in terms of your earliest days?
Well, to be honest, Greg, as I look over my 60 years of being here on earth, I can see the hand of the Lord every step of the way. Not that I was walking with him up until 20 years ago, but he had a plan for me, and he saved me from being killed in a revolution in Venezuela. I was raised basically in Venezuela. My dad was in the oil business and went through 3 revolutions, and one of them I escaped death by 15 minutes. It's all in the book. I came back to the United States and was quite the rounder, but finished college and went into business for myself and came to realize that government was the cost of doing business. So I got involved in some campaigns and worked for people, and ended up, and the story's in the book, ended up being elected to state representative to the Texas legislature. My personal life was a mess. I was drinking too much, raising hell too much, and carousing, and almost lost my family. Got elected to Congress, came to Christ right after I got elected to Congress, and I've walked with him now for over 20 years.
One of the beautiful things about doing this show is I get to speak to people that really make a difference and people I respect tremendously. David McCullough, thank you so much for coming aboard. To say that I have appreciated your work would be an understatement.
Well, I hugely appreciate that, and I'm delighted to be included in your program.
One of the things and one of the reasons we wanted you aboard is because you believe, as I do and as many of our listeners do, that when it comes to civics, when it comes to history, when it comes to knowing how we got here, our school systems are failing us.
They're failing us badly. I think it's the worst problem we have in education today, and it's been going on for about 25 years or more. We've been raising youngsters who are no longer youngsters, who are essentially historically illiterate. And I say that not to suggest that they aren't very bright. They're as bright as can be, but they haven't been taught very well. There are
what can we do about it?
Wonderful history teachers everywhere in the country. No question about it, but they're fewer and farther between. Much less emphasis is being put on history than used to be. Less time, it's not as required anymore. You can graduate from some of the best universities and colleges in the country having had no history whatsoever. It's not required. One college president was asked how that could be so. Why isn't history required? And he said, because it's not popular. Well, it's often not popular because it's made so dreary by dreary teachers or by dreary textbooks. And in my view, this is a kind of creeping amnesia, which could be dangerous when you have a whole population that has no idea of how we got to where we are, or at what cost, or at what struggle, or what heroism, and who take their blessings that we have as a nation and as a people for granted. And we can fix this problem. That's the other thing. It's not hard to change, and is being changed in many places, in many different kinds of institutions, with marked success. One of the main things we have to do is to revise how we're teaching our teachers. Too many of our young people who aspire to go into education are graduating with degrees in education from schools of education, and they then have to learn about physics or history or literature on the job. And we really ought to have to go back, as many places are, to requiring those who want to go into education to have a real major, a real liberal arts education with a serious major.
We are The Right Balance on the Accent Radio Network. The book in question, Conservatives Betrayed, How George W. Bush and Other Big Government Republicans Hijacked the Conservative Cause. And we're speaking with the funding father, if you will, of the conservative movement, Richard Viguerie. Richard, you were talking about the third force. Please explain.
Well, Greg, I think that Republicans have, as I said in the book, they've hijacked the conservative cause. They betrayed their conservative voters, and I think too many conservatives. You and I both voted for Bush twice, and but it's time that we begin to distance ourselves from the Republican Party. No longer think of ourselves as Republicans, but think of ourselves first primarily as conservatives, as Reagan conservatives, if you would, and pull both political parties, pull the entire political process to the right. The most powerful third force in American politics today is the Israeli lobby. That's an issue that is off the table. Everybody, Republican, Democrat, conservative, and liberal, evidence strong support for the state of Israel. On the conservative side, the most successful third force is the National Rifle Association. No national Democrat is willing to tackle the NRA these days. They have been so successful, they have taken that issue off the table. So I think we need to go out there and act independently of the Republican Party.